right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or maybe it's even good evening for you. My name is Jordan, and you are listening to another episode of Jordan's Famous Friends. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with my dear friend, Steven McCausland, who is the Chicagoland Regional Superintendent for the Evangelical Free Church of America, and also just a fairly somewhat recent new friend. He is doing some things in the Chicagoland area that I'm sure we'll talk about and go through in the next couple of moments. But Steven, welcome.
Thanks, buddy.
Did I say your last name right? I always
Yeah,
feel like I mispronounce it.
you're one of the few that did.
On our first episode, I had Josh Weiland in, and I asked him the same question because I was like, "Hey, man, is that really how you say your name?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's good." So it's McCausland.
Yeah, and I've been saying Wheeland this whole time.
Josh Weiland is his name. So yeah, absolutely. Steven, man, you got a lot going on your plate. This is a relatively new position that you're in, and we don't really dive into positions. We might get to it, but yeah, you just have achieved a lot in your life, and just where you're currently at and what you have going on. So take us back. We asked for the Cliff Notes version of how you kind of got to where you're at, or this point in your life. What are some pivotal moments or decisions that shape that journey to where you're at right now? So you can start like, I was born in, and you can go all the way there, or you can just go back to like some pivotal moments. It's up to you.
Sure, and I'm assuming you want maybe deeper answers, less shallow.
It's totally up to you, man. Like, I mean, at the start, I'm just curious how you got to where you're currently at.
Sure. The simple answer, let's see. I grew up in Washington State, kind of rural. My dad was a journalist, and he loved education and learning, and so we picked that up by osmosis from him. I did an undergrad in music and could not get into a grad program in music anywhere, so I just went to work at a church doing music ministry, and then realized I really, really like ministry. And so I went to seminary to finish out my biblical education so that I could be an actual qualified pastor. I met my wife in seminary, and then we took our first church back in Washington State, and I was an associate pastor for a pretty good-sized church for almost a decade, and then moved out here to Trinity to do a PhD, which I finished. And while I was doing the PhD, I was doing consulting with the Center for Transformational Churches, which was a grant that Trinity had to help pastors that were struggling with burnout and resilience. And we worked with the Free Church for that grant, and that's where I met Rick Thompson, the district superintendent, who called me as soon as I graduated and offered me this position. And that's how I got here.
Okay, so neat. Like, that sounds so like I'm unfazed. It's not true at all. There's two things about you that I think are fascinating. Number one is your doctoral thesis on pastoral burnout. Like, that's a whole, and I read it, by the way. Like, I think you were kind of surprised that I actually like read your whole thesis. I was like, this is super intriguing. But you forgot one thing that people probably don't know about you is you're in the pen game.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yes.
yeah, you got to elaborate on that. You can't just like bypass, like, I mean, you're doing all this stuff in the church world, and that's great, but there's this little kind of, niche market that you're in.
Yeah. So like I said, my dad was a journalist, and he wrote everything in fountain pen, since he was a kid. And so he got into collecting the really, really high-end stuff. And he knew a pen shop owner in Seattle. And this guy, he was the first pen guy to put his inventory on the internet when the internet was starting to boom.
We're not talking about like big pens here either. We're talking about like, these are like high-end like pens.
Yeah, $200, $300, $400 is the entry level, and then it goes up into tens and twenties of thousands of dollars. It's the jewelry industry, and it's a very niche market.
So anyway, your dad kind of was a catalyst for that, but that's kind of where you had it. So keep going.
Yeah, he got me the job with this guy who was the first to put his business on the web, and Amazon came to him when they were still just doing books and said, "Can we sell your pens on our site?" And then his business exploded during the .com era, and so I got to ride that wave and learn the industry and learn how e-commerce worked. And then when I became a pastor, I kind of kept all this going on the side just to supplement income and pay for vacation and all that stuff. So yeah, I've been doing that for 20 years now.
Yeah, it's crazy because we started kind of getting to know each other through the pastoral world, and then this like creeped in, and I'm like, wait, hold on a second, you do what? And I've actually seen like your operation and been like firsthand, be able to witness what transpires there. It's absolutely a whole nother world that I don't think people realize even exists. And you're right on. It's the jewelry world of what, penmanship, or I don't know. I'm sure there's collectors out there.
If you've got too much money and you like nice stuff, you put your money there. So generally doctors and attorneys have at least one Mont Blanc pen, and that's like a cultural thing that they all do. And then Mont Blanc knows that, so they release limited editions every year that start at $1,000 and gain in value across the years. So
it's unbelievable. I don't want to hone in on that, but it is just I didn't even know I was out there, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, this is a thing. It's like when you talk to people and you're like, that's a thing, and they're like, yeah, that's a thing. You're like, all right, I guess that's a real thing. But you can definitely get lost for those of you who are listening, you can definitely get lost in the world of pens if you just start Googling special high-end pens or whatever the case is, and it is a market and a half for sure.
For sure, paid for PhD program. I had a couple seminary students working for me. We had a warehouse out by the school, and we just did pens and other stuff.
The best part about talking to you about pens is you're so apathetic about it. Yeah, so high-end pens. It's what I do. We start talking about pastoral stuff. You light up. This is an audio podcast for sure, and people can't see your face where you're like, yeah, your hands on your head, it's a thing. I'm doing that. Anyway, moving along. All right, so that's kind of how you got to where you're at in the Chicagoland area. With pastors or people who are in the ministry, I ask what books have greatly influenced their life. Obviously, books have a profound impact on our lives. For people in the ministry, I tell them you can't say the Bible. Other books outside the Bible or authors, so it can be a book or an author, that has significantly influenced you or played a role in shaping your perspective, guiding you along your path. What would you say those are?
Yeah. The author and book that comes to mind is Don Carson's and Greg Beale's New Testament use of the Old Testament. Probably no one else will say that, but Carson had this methodology of hermeneutics that no one else really espoused for, I think, hundreds of years, where he took the text that Jesus and the apostles quoted from the Old Testament and tried to see how they were using and quoting the Old Testament and kind of get in their minds and see what kind of hermeneutics they used. So he kind of spearheaded that methodology and taught it in his class here at Trinity. And so I got to sit under that teaching. I did his PhD seminar on it, and then I read his books on it. And it really revolutionized the way that I read the Old Testament and the New Testament.
He has a commentary for people who are looking for it. He has a commentary on the New Testament, but this is the commentary on the New Testament use of the Old Testament, correct? There's a difference between the two.
Right.
Did I get that right? Yeah. Keep going.
Yeah. It's kind of, it's a complete, each book, he brings in a different New Testament scholar to do the work. So he's what do you call that? Where he compiled it. He didn't really write.
Which is there's still a lot of work involved in that.
It's really, shockingly, it's a controversial book in that other professors I had were very critical of it and said that Jesus and the apostles misquoted the Old Testament when they used it, or they got lucky and they made applications that weren't intended when the Old Testament writers were writing. So he was thrown under the bus by his colleagues for that book, but it really did revolutionize my spiritual walk and my understanding of Scripture.
What others? You have any more?
Let's see. Well, I've been in the resilience and burnout lit for a long time. Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning was pretty significant for understanding how we understand and process life and how personalities developed. There's a personality psychologist named Brian Little, and he wrote a book called Me, Myself, and I. And he figured out exactly how humans are formed. Like, what role do your parents play? What role does environment? What role does genetics play in shaping who we become and choose to become as individuals? So those really shaped me significantly.
Who wrote that again?
Brian Little.
Brian Little. I've heard of it, but yeah, I don't think I've ever actually seen it.
Jump on YouTube. You'll see his TED Talk, and it's really hilarious and it's really popular. But he takes apart the Myers-Briggs, and it's not scientific, and then he puts forward the Big Five. It's another personality model that is scientific.
Have you always been kind of intrigued with that? I mean, I don't want to go back and keep harping on it, but obviously, your doctoral thesis is about pastors and burnout. Does that just intrigue you? The mind, how it works, the personality, psychology kind of side of things?
Big time. Yeah. Why am I the way that I am? Why are others the way that they are? How do we get here? And how do we change? If change is possible. A lot of people think you just are who you are and you have no choice. That's probably the predominant view, I think, out there in particular.
Do you believe that?
So, not at all, no.
So you believe people can change?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the essence of the gospel.
Yeah. It's just interesting. Do you think that has come from, I mean, these are books that influence your life. Do you think that comes from childhood or education, or where do you think that curiosity comes from?
In myself?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when I was a pastor, I tended to be the hardest working guy in the room, much like you.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that.
I worked to burnout twice. I'm only 41 and worked to burnout twice. And after the second time especially, I was like, why am I doing this? Why do I keep doing this? There's something wrong with me. I got to figure it out.
Yeah.
I think that's where it came from. My dad's also, like I said, is a journalist. There's a proverb, I think it's Proverbs 29 or 30, where it says, it's the glory of God to conceal a matter, and it's the glory of a king to discover it. We're just Solomon, or I think it's Hezekiah is writing. Hezekiah's researchers are writing, and they're saying one of the most fun, life-giving things we can do as human beings and image bearers is discover how God made the world to work. And so I've made that proverb kind of one of my own.
It's always fascinating to me, where people get their curiosities from, right? Where did that come from? Sometimes I think it's from childhood. Sometimes it can be from a crisis moment. It can come from so many different things. It's we get stuck on things in existence where we go, man, now I'm fascinated by that specific thing. So always curious about that. What's that?
Do you have an area that you're into that?
We're doing it right now. I'm always curious about how people think and what they think, and the natural curiosity. I don't know where it comes from. I couldn't tell you. I've just always been naturally curious about how the world works, and why are you the way you are, and why do you do the things that you do, and what it looks like. So I remember our conversation when we first, I think we first met, actually. You came up to me and you're like, hey, when do you think you're going to burn out? I was like, what? Who are you? And we started talking, and my mind went to I wonder why he asked that question. So you were curious about, my drive, and I was curious about why you were curious about my drive. So I've done that my whole life.
What made you like this?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah. I have no idea. So when you figure it out, let me know. Shoot me an email and tell me.
All right.
All right. So obviously books are a purchase, right? always interested in kind of the little things that make a big difference. Share with us a purchase or an investment that you've made that has a surprisingly positive impact in your life. It could be a product, could be a service, could be an experience, but something that has made a difference for you.
So my mentor, Lee Eklov, he took all his money and he put it in his front yard. And he
like
built
literally, like his like dollar bills and stuff like that.
No, not literally.
I see this guy just going out like putting money in his front yard. Anyway, keep going.
So yeah, if you're going to remodel your house or put money somewhere in your house, he put it all in his front yard, and specifically his porch. He had the best furniture. He had like a swing set out there, great landscaping, and he said he did this so that he could reach his neighborhood for Jesus. And so his porch was constantly filled with neighbors. I did the same thing here at my place. We put a ton of money and effort into the landscaping, into the seating, into the like fire pits and outdoor heaters. And now the entire neighborhood comes together at my house every night of summer, and we eat food, we drink, we talk, stay out late. It's been a fantastic way to reach our neighborhood.
Every night?
Almost, yeah.
Do you guys just go out and then whoever comes out comes out?
Exactly. Generally, it's kids, but maybe 2 out of the 7 parents come over and plop down, and we just start talking life.
What do you do if you have to go to bed? Like, do you just leave and let people stay outside?
Yeah, I've gotten very comfortable. Oh, no. Hey, I'm headed to bed now. Good time. Yeah.
Thanks for coming over to my house. Please don't come in. Like, you can go back home, but yeah.
Well, once the kids go in and I go in, no one's going to stay in someone else's front yard.
Yeah, for sure.
Chicago.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Like, there's a bunch of people hanging out in your front yard in Chicago. They're like, what's going on over there? You've started a gang.
Yeah, exactly.
Congratulations. Anything else? Any other, that's a huge investment, I'm sure, but like other things that have like a surprisingly positive impact?
I always have 4 or 5 pairs of outdoor shoes for running and hiking, and all my free time that's not with family and work goes to being out in God's creation.
That's fair. So, do you have like a pair of shoes that you're like, these are it? These are the ones. Like, I would buy these again.
I'm really digging Brooks because they're from my hometown, and then I'm really into the trail running shoes.
Like the new ones.
Yeah.
Do you have a specific pair or no?
Whatever's on sale.
That's totally fair. Whatever I can get for the cheapest.
Right.
Looking kind of into. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, same question. What was the purchase that revolutionized Jordan Muck?
Oh man, you're not allowed to ask me the questions. I'm asking you the questions. It was funny because my wife and I were talking about this the other day, and she's like, "How would you answer these questions?" I was like, "It's not about me. It's about like who I'm talking to." We'll save that for another time. Maybe I'll run these questions in another episode, and then I'll just shoot them to you.
Oh.
I love that you're wanting to ask though. Like, hey, what about you? Yeah, I'll shoot you the episode. We'll keep people guessing, right? Like
your home gym, by the
way. Looking at where you're at and like how you got there. Going back to that for a second. Failure is often a stepping stone to success. Like, we look at people and how they got to places, and we think to ourselves, like, that came from a failure, or that came from me like trying to move in this direction. It didn't work, and I moved it and it changed into a different direction. What's a time when you face failure or a setback? What did overcoming that look like? What do you learn from that experience, and how does it push you to where you're currently at? Like, do you have one that stands out?
Sure.
That you would want to share?
Yeah, there's a bunch.
Yeah, that's it's the hard one. It's the one we're looking for, the one that like comes to the forefront of your mind. It's that one,
Yeah, sure. And I equate failure and God's discipline. as pretty similar. So if you look at Proverbs and Hebrews, he talks about God disciplines the son in whom he delights, because he's trying to shape you into something specific for his kingdom. So for me, the big moment of discipline came, my church that I've been at for 10 years was extremely successful, extremely well liked, getting very good at my craft. Unbeknownst to me, the senior pastor and the board had decided they wanted to move on. They wanted a different pastor. And so one board meeting, kind of out of the blue, they said, "Hey, when do you want to quit? When are you moving on? It's over. Thank you. Good luck to you."
You had no idea.
I had no idea. Yeah. Completely caught me by surprise. And it caught the congregation by surprise. So there was a fallout and a not really a split, but just a ton of people left and were angry and couldn't understand. And there was some libel and slander that took place that I don't want to get to in a public way, but
sure,
it just made it really, really ugly. And so, I'm on the slopes, I'm skiing, everything's going great, and then suddenly I crash, I lose all my gear, and I'm standing up dazed trying to say, what just happened? Was that my fault? Was that their fault? Am I completely lacking in self-awareness that I caused all this to happen? Or do I just not understand people at all, that people would not like me and I assumed that they liked me? I mean, that's a pretty big failure of character.
Sure.
So that began my journey. That's why I moved out here and did my PhD and started studying, trying to understand myself and people and God as well. Like, God, why did you allow this to happen? Why do you work that way? What are you trying to do? It seemed when it all happened that the bad people were winning and the good people were suffering.
Yeah. So do you feel like you wouldn't be doing what you're doing right now if that hadn't happened?
Yeah, I'd be taking all my energy and it would be going in a different direction back at that church or at a similar church.
It's fascinating because it puts you on that trajectory, right? Like of where you're at. If you could go back and do that all over again, would you do it the same way or would you do it different?
Yeah, well, what it boiled down to is I was lacking some self-awareness. That I did not understand how I came across to other people and how I affected other people. So there were a ton of signs early on that I was choosing to ignore. So it needed to happen. Mm-hmm. I needed something major to happen to help me grow up all the way.
Yeah. So you would say it doesn't just affect where you're at right now, but it also taught you a lot about yourself.
Oh yeah, it grew me up huge. It was the, like I said, the discipline of the Lord is what he does that's how he grows us. Otherwise we're just content to, play video games and do nothing.
Mm-hmm. Play video games and do nothing. As you're in this spot and you find yourself in this place, do you feel like whether it was in the past or currently, you have the same message? And if it is, what is your go-to message to the world? I tell people a lot, I'm like, I should probably ask your spouse this because it's the one thing you say all the time, right? Like, what would that be that you push people to live by or strive to impart to other people? Is there like one go-to message that you have for the world? Yeah,
that's a great question, Jordan. And I want to hear every episode to hear what... life message. So I think too many people choose to just stagnate or maintain or just exist. And I am what I am, and that's all there is to it. But God has a very specific design for you and for me and for his church as a whole in terms of what maturity looks like. He's growing us to something very specific, and that is the image of his son. We need to look like Christ at the end of the day. And that's mediated through personality, through context, through place in society, through your time in history. But there is a specific person that God wants to grow you into. And so it's your job, it's my job to figure out what that is and move towards it with everything I've got.
Do you find yourself saying it in the same or different ways?
Yeah, different ways all the time. It's different for pastors, different for kids, different for men, different for women. Yeah.
Yeah. You articulate it probably different depending on the person, right? What about quotes? Like, do you have quotes that you live by or think about often? Are there like those mottos that resonate deeply with you? Some people, it's super fast, right? Like we talked about books and stuff like that, and other people, it's like, I don't know who said it, but I live by this. Are there any quotes in your life that you think about often or try to live by?
I have a framework that frames how I view maturity in life and the direction I'm going. I can't think of any quotes off the top of my head, but I'll just give you the framework real quick.
Yeah.
That's, as an image bearer, we're designed to know the person whose image we reflect. So the first and most important thing in anyone's life is to pursue God and to know God and to become like him with all you've got. That requires self-awareness. You have to know whether your life reflects the Creator or your life reflects an idol. Second, Jesus said the second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. So people are why God put us on the planet after pursuing him with all we've got. So caring and loving people is the most important thing. Third, God made us for a challenge. He made us to do hard things. He wants us to be strong. When Luke describes Jesus' maturity, he says he grew in the favor of God and man, and he grew in strength. So embracing challenge, embracing discipline, embracing change, all that is how God designed humans to flourish and come to life. We do hard things. That's what makes us like our Creator.
Yeah.
Those three things kind of guide me.
Yeah.
God,
yeah.
challenge.
And they probably have come from quotes. It's hard to sometimes. I'm with you. Like sometimes it's like, I don't know the exact quote, but I know this is the principle behind the quote. And this is where it comes from, right? Like, I think that's important. You talked about your front porch a little bit, which is amazing. But there are investments that are different than just like tangible things, right? Like you have money, time, energy, things like that. What's one of the best, most worthwhile investments you've made in your life, looking back in all these years? And it could be an investment of any kind. It could something that has a significant impact in your life, like personal or professionally, that's outside of that front porch.
Yeah. I'll give you two things. I guess three, two and a half. So we're made in the image of God. We're made to flourish in his image, and our body is part of that. So the family I grew up in knew nothing about the body. And we're, as a family, as an extended family, we're prone to drug abuse and obesity, just not taking care of.
You're saying your family, like your, yeah.
Extended family. Yeah.
Sure.
Aunts, uncles, parents. So when I started studying what it meant to be an image bearer, I suddenly realized I should have figured this out decades ago. The way I care for my body directly affects my spiritual health, directly affects my relationship with God, affects my relationship with people. So exercise, investing in exercise has been pivotal for me. Your brain doesn't go fully online unless it has enough sleep and enough oxygen, and it only gets oxygen through cardiovascular and strength training. So doing those things really changed me. So exercise, sleep, and diet are only a new thing for me, and they've changed my life.
When you say they're a new thing for you, like what is the catalyst to that coming into fruition? Like, was it looking at family, looking at like the trajectory that you were on? Like, that's a really interesting right turn, from here I'm living my life this way, and now I'm going to live my life this way.
Yeah, burnout. You burn out when you're not exercising, eating healthy, and sleeping. That's one of the causes. And so, it's God made it that way. If you don't live and manage your body the way He designed it to work, it quits working. So I got a really bad eye twitch. My head would throb, kind of with a hot, painful sensation. Couldn't focus, couldn't sleep. After you deprive yourself of sleep, then your body can't sleep when you want to sleep. So all these uncomfortable effects start taking place on your body when you don't handle it, care for it the way God made it to be.
So would you say that's a daily investment?
Yeah, hour a day for exercise. You got to. There's a calorie and nutritional goals that I have, and then I try to sleep 7 to 9 hours a night.
If you look at your clock and you're like, I've only slept 6 hours and 55 minutes, do you stay in bed until the 7th one?
No. No. I sleep that 6 days a week. I usually have a cheat night because of work or something.
Oh, where you like totally like bomb on it.
Yeah.
That's so funny. We talked about the pens a little bit. We all have like quirks, right? Guilty pleasures, stuff like that. Is there an unusual habit or a seemingly absurd thing that you're particularly fond of that brings you joy?
It's probably the pens, and it's actually repairing them.
Oh, so it's not just the sales part of it.
Yeah, I like buying like an estate sale of old pens that have sat there for decades and restoring them and bringing back to life. So I repair the mechanisms inside, I polish the casings, I make the gold shine like it's brand new again, and adjust the nib so that it writes flawlessly and smoothly. So that brings me a lot of life and joy to do.
To be able to restore something that's broken.
Yeah.
Which goes into everything we've just been talking about. It's funny how the material sometimes enhances the immaterial, or vice versa, which is super funny to me.
It doesn't me that Jesus was this artisan craftsman.
True. Yeah.
I mean, he's studying God's word and preparing his sermons and his database for reaching people, but he was also just working with his hands. And that does not surprise.
One of my favorite scenes from The Passion is when Jesus is building the table, and his mom is watching him build the table, and she comes over to him, or whatever, and he pats on the table, and she's like, it's kind of tall, isn't it? He's like, it's a tall table, and they're having this dialogue that's very just normal, but he's exercising his craft. And then he takes water because, Mary's like, you need to wash your hands before dinner, and he throws water on her. And I just think to myself, like, that's a very good, image of what Jesus was truly like. He was an artisan. He was very much, a master of his craft, but at the same time, like, his humor had to be on point too, as well,
Yeah, that's a great point. Are you allowed to watch Roman Catholic movies?
Wow. Oh, man. All right. So with that said, it is a little bit unusual. I think there's a lot of people out there who do, those things like restoration and stuff like that. It's actually becoming more and more common. What is a new belief or behavior or a habit that's improved your life, right? Like, so change is constant. Growth often comes from adopting new beliefs or behaviors or habits, depending on like the person. But yeah, what's something new that you've incorporated into your life recently that has a positive impact on where you're headed? Sure.
So I've always been detailed, planned out, scheduled, kind of robot-like in how I do my habits. And it occurred to me, I should have an overarching lifelong plan for getting to know God through his word. So I have divided the Bible up in chunks that I'll memorize, I'll reflect on, I'll read, I'll speed read through, just various different types of ways of ingesting scripture. And it's a detailed 5-year plan that I update every year and have been following. So um, using all the tools that lead to business and life success, I've put specifically aimed at getting to know God through studying his word. And that's been absolutely life-changing.
Is there like did that come from something, or did you just it's kind of like self-created?
I started with read the Bible through in a year. Then there's the chronological scripture reading. A guy named Grant Horner has a methodology where you read 10 chapters a day, and at the end of 5 or 6 years, you essentially have the Bible memorized in its general content. And then I've created my own based on my own gift sets.
Just basically like after all the years of reading through the Bible, like, okay, this is what it looks like for Steven to do it. Is that what you're saying?
Right. And then I have specific scriptures I want to have memorized at the end of 5 years. And so every 2 months I have about a week of just solid scripture memory for my devotions.
How much like are you talking in regards to memory? Are we talking like a verse, or like are you talking like significant amount of verses?
So 2 years ago, for the month of November, December, I memorized Hebrews. This year, because I don't want to lose that week of scripture memory was dedicated to revisiting the book of Hebrews and just trying to keep it within my memory base. So a chapter to a whole book, a short book.
That's awesome. Will you ever make that public or no? Not your scripture memory, your plan. Sorry, I should have been more specific.
Yeah, I could. Yeah,
you just walk down the road, start like, hey, let me tell you what I know by heart. No, that wasn't what I was talking about.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to be able to see that, like, especially if people are listening to this, could be able to see it, but it's not. It's not ready for the world yet. We'll let you know.
Yeah. But we do it with our health. We do it with our careers. We do it with everything else important we do it with. So we've got to do God and his word, first of all.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Everything you know about everything, right? What advice would you give to somebody who's about to go into the real world right now? Real world. Like we put that in, like air quotes, if you will. But all the experiences and insights that you have, what advice would you give somebody who's navigating the challenges of the real world today?
Yeah, it goes back to this discipline challenge thing. Like if you're in the vine and you're bearing fruit, God prunes you back so that you can grow even more. So I think our culture and society has this attitude, and maybe this is just a human nature thing, all cultures, all societies, where we run from pain and from challenge. And my advice is to lean into it and see what you can learn every single time.
What about advice people should ignore? Like you have so many, beliefs. People have so many beliefs that they hear every day. Like what should people ignore or maybe even question?
So the whole notion of if you feel it, that's your design, that's wrong. So feelings, our senses give us feelings that we then are supposed to process through our brain to decide what to do with those feelings. And when we just act on the feeling itself without thinking and thinking that feeling itself is good, we're shorting how God designed our entire soul to work. So everything be evaluated and processed through our brain.
So do you think, with that said, because you probably work primarily with pastors, right? Like, are there bad recommendations or practices that come across from that? Or do you think people act on that? Like they look at that and say like, if this is what I feel, then this is what I should do. And if this is what I should do, then obviously like I'm in the right spot, even though maybe I don't feel like 100% satisfied with it. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Most common one, and this isn't just pastors, is we're looking for confirmation from the divine through our feelings. God, should I buy this house? Okay, I'm going to look within and see how I feel about it. And somehow assuming that our feelings are God's way of talking to us. And I think we short wisdom, we short rationality and cognitive functioning when we only look to feelings.
So how
Especially
would
in
go
prayer.
ahead? Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, in prayer, people, this idea of I need to center myself in prayer to start my day. I'm confused by it. Like, what does that mean? Like, aren't you centered in, like, what do you? I think at the base you're trying to make your emotions most important.
So with that said, you have to hear a couple of times people say like, God, this is dangerous, but like God told me, or like I feel like God is saying. So how do you respond back to that? Because there are some people who, whether they're, I don't want to just narrow that down or pigeonhole that to just pastors, right? Like we look at people who are in professions, whether it's secular or sacred, full-time ministry, or which we could obviously like go on that and say like all areas can be full-time ministry opportunities. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there's people who are in places where they're like, I feel like God told me, or I feel like, they use the I feel is what I'm getting at. And how do you respond to somebody who says that when you dialogue with them?
Yeah. So it's generally a misunderstanding of what feelings are designed to do. Feelings are your five senses taking inventory of what's around you, feeding it up to what's called your limbic system, which then gives it an emotion. And that emotion is designed to motivate you to action, but emotion has to be processed through what's called the prefrontal cortex, which is your rational cognitive center. So people that just take feelings and emotions and then make decisions based on those feelings and emotions without evaluating the validity of them short circuit or shortcut how God designed the entire brain unit to work. So like this family in the church I worked at, they said God told them to buy this mansion and make it a home for foster kids and single moms. They couldn't afford it. They didn't have the money for it. They had no previous management of an orphanage or of a women's shelter. They just felt that God told them that, and they went to a charismatic church and started fundraising with other people they knew that they could kind of get on board through the emotionality of it. And so they raised a ton of money, but couldn't raise enough to buy the house, and the entire idea went by the way. And they just wasted all that money and time and effort based on God told me this through a feeling.
Yeah.
So they should have taken their rational side and said, can we afford it? Do we have the skill set to manage this as a business? And then do we have the psychological counseling therapeutic skills to work with traumatized people? And they had none of those. Yeah. Completely unclear.
So you're saying it's a calculated, you're saying, or it sounds like you're saying, be calculated in you're not taking out the element of faith or saying like, hey, this is invalid. You're looking at it and saying you're taking advice solely off of or a recommendation solely off of a feeling that might not be a true feeling.
It's not, it might be a true feeling, but it's just a feeling, and feelings come and go.
Yeah, like anger has been said a couple of times to be a manifestation of a deeper emotion, right? Like a couple of people said like anger's not an emotion. Anger is a manifestation of other emotions, like you're hungry or angry or you're tired. You can't use angry, but those type of things, right? So it almost sounds like you're in the same vein as that. Like you put an action based off of a supposed emotion that may or may not be true. So it almost feels like you're saying explore that to make sure there's validity to that. True?
Yeah. You have to explore it deeply. That's where self-awareness comes into play, and then also the community. You run the feeling, the emotion, the thought through your community for their wisdom, and then make a decision.
What about the like overthinking? Like, are there bad recommendations in regards to people overthinking things? Like, can you go too far on the extreme of that and say like you thought about that too much? Like, is
Yeah.
that valid?
Yeah. So there was a case where your emotions are processed through the center of your brain called the limbic center. There was a guy who had a tumor in his limbic center, and he lost the ability to feel emotion. And all he could do was think. That's
What?
it. He
I don't
processed.
even know what that would feel like. Like immediately, I think, man, that's kind of a blessing and not a curse.
But like, well, I'm hungry. I need to eat. Well, I could have a sandwich. I could have spaghetti. I could, and so he just run all these
Oh,
different
he
options.
wouldn't actually like make a decision.
He could never make a decision.
Now that'd be
So you,
horrible.
yeah, your emotions are the gasoline that powers the vehicle of your cognition.
Hmm.
So without emotion, you can't do anything. Um, or you might be overthinking because you don't have a strong enough emotional desire to win out your thoughts.
So could you say, taking the last three questions that I've asked you, advice to somebody in the real world, advice people should ignore, bad recommendations. It almost feels like what you're saying is like think about things, but don't overthink about things. Live in that sweet spot between the two of contemplation and uh, doing things that are legit, not logistically make sense, but have been somewhat calculated to an extent that you could make a movement forward, knowing that
Yeah.
that it's gonna be okay.
Yes. Yeah. And that's it all goes back to self awareness. Do I know where emotions come from and what their role is? Do I know how cognition is and what its role is? And yeah, you got to avoid the extremes of over emotionality and over cognition or intrusive thoughts,
Yeah.
anxious processing.
With your own life, as you do that, have boundaries, priorities. What have you become better at saying no to? Are there things that you look at and go like, I'm okay with saying no to that now that I might not have said no to that before?
Yeah. One of the weaknesses of not just me, but the men in my family for generations is we like to be saviors and we like to be needed.
Hmm.
So anyone needs anything, the answer is always yes. And it's not an altruistic yes, it's because it makes me feel good to be the provider, the savior, the answer. So I've so feelings come on me that say, "Oh, I feel good if I help my neighbor with their outdoor projects." So I'm going to do it. I can't say no. But then my rational side has to come into play. Well, if I help my neighbor, then I'm going to neglect my family, and I haven't been around much this week. So I have to choose what's more important: feeding that need in me to be needed, or being a father and a husband to my family.
So which one have you become better at saying no to?
I'm gaining the self awareness to say no when I'm triggered, when my need to be needed is triggered.
Oh, gotcha. So you would say if I have a sense of neediness, which may be selfishness, you're more inclined to say no to that thing than if it's like a genuine, this is, for the well being of self and others.
Right, right, exactly.
Wow, that's an interesting equation to run through. Like, I wonder what the ramifications would be if people actually contemplated those things before they said yes, no, or give me some more time or whatever the case is. Yeah, that's very intriguing to me because we talked a little bit about emotions, but like I'll lie to myself all the time. I'll be like, no, you didn't do that for your own well being. You're doing it for the other things. So deceitful emotions are a real thing too, right?
Deceitful emotions.
Like the way we justify things or the way people lie to themselves. Let's go that direction.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if it's emotion or the cognition that follows the rationality that gives a narrative to the emotion. Is
Yeah,
probably where.
I like
And
what you said better. That makes way more sense. What about when you feel like overwhelmed or unfocused? What do you do? How do you regain focus? How do you get clarity back?
so one of the first things I do is I double check, have I taken care of my body? Like if you don't sleep, you're going to feel overwhelmed. If you don't eat right, you're going to feel overwhelmed. If I'm low on exercise, my brain doesn't have enough blood and oxygen to process well. So I look for a physical cause. And then if the answer is one of those physical causes, then I take steps to fix that. But if it's not physical, what I do is I make a list and I prioritize the list, and then I take my calendar out and I put each thing of the list. I fit it in the calendar at its appropriate time. Once it's out of the brain and on paper, it frees up your brain from needing to chew on it. Because it's got a place and it's got somewhere where I know it's going to get done, and I can free up my mind to worry about other things or whatever's in front of me.
Actually handwritten, or like can you type it out and like a technological device?
Yeah, I handwrite the list and then I type it out on my digital calendar.
Gotcha. As we land the plane, the last question I always ask people is, what's one thing people never ask you but you wish they would?
Do people have insightful answers to that?
It's really interesting because one, I don't think people think about it enough. I don't think I think there is a thing inside of all humanity where we have something we would love to talk to people about, but we don't talk about it because we're never asked, right? Like,
Yeah.
and it is very deep seated, and when that comes up, it really sparks passion, but you have to ask the right question. So what I've learned is just over the years is just asking people that question is, what's one thing people never ask you but you wish that they would, which usually is the springboard into what they're really truly, I don't want to say all about, but kind of what drives them.
Jordan, you are a genius, man. Incredible.
So I kind of stole this, like,
Steal too.
well, I stole it from. There are so many books out there that I would love to rewrite and just put in like where they got that from, right? Have you ever been reading a book and you're like, oh, you got that from here, you got that from here? In the Bible, it says there's nothing new under the sun, right? So like, it comes from a business concept, and in business, when you get to the closing, you always ask the person, is there anything that we didn't discuss that needs to be discussed? Or are there any, like in looking at the paperwork, you saw your end of the deal, I've seen my end of the deal, we've seen each other's end of the deal. Is there anything in all these documents that we need to go over again or that we need to explore? And so when you look at that, those are when like the true things come out, like, oh yeah, we forgot like this or whatever the case is, or the person's like, no, I'm 100% satisfied. What I realized was people have something within them. So when I get to end of conversations, it could be like in meetings or whatever, I'll usually ask somebody, I'll be like, hey, is there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have asked you? And it has gotten me so far, because I mean, even like buying things, right? I've done that at grocery stores before. Like, is there anything that, I should have picked up that I didn't pick up? And it's like, oh yeah, that one thing, right? Or whatever the case is. But if you take it into if you drill down a little bit further, I've learned just in conversations with people, like I've learned a lot about them just asking, like, what's one thing people never ask you, but you wish that they would? So I've given you ample time to process. Now you get to answer.
No, that's good. I like how you think. We actually do that at the end of the PhD interviews as well, when you're mining data from someone for your topic. So I actually felt this emotion week. I was meeting with a professional, and it was supposed to be a give and take conversation where we're talking about our fields. But this guy was anxious, and I didn't pick up on it right away. but I realized he was anxious when he just kept talking and talking and talking.
Hmm.
He didn't ask me a single question about myself. But he responded every time I asked him a question. He loved it. And he went on seamlessly. So our 90-minute meeting was, the entire thing was him talking about himself. And he left feeling great. And I'm sure his anxiety was comforted, but I left feeling kind of used. Like,
Yeah.
I don't feel humanized at all. Like, that was worthless. So I felt this emotion. Is there one thing people never ask you, but you wish they would? Yeah, I wish that people as a whole would view relationships as interdependent. I need from you, but I also give to you. There's this mutuality to a conversation, a give and take. And too many people, I think the negative emotion of anxiety, fear, whatever they're processing in their mind, prevents them from seeing the person that's sitting across from them.
Yeah. There is a lot of truth to that. Like, it's interesting you bring that up because it just happened to me this week twice. Like,
Really?
I was in a conversation, which is probably why this podcast is killing you, because like you're like, I want to ask you, like, what do you think? There should be a give and take, but yeah, I was in a conversation with this individual, and it was just so much about them. They never asked me a question, they never, and it wasn't like this dialogue, right, where we set it up to be that way or in that format. It was so much of a, like, he told me everything that I didn't even want to know. And I'm like, I don't, okay. It was not what was your word? Dehumanizing? I don't know, like the actual word that you said, but it was very much like, I didn't feel like there was a mutual human interaction. It was very much just a spewing of information where he was like, here, this is what you need to know. And I was like, none of what you just said has any connotations to any of my life. I don't know what to do with it.
What was his motivation?
It was during a community event, and we had never met each other. So the interaction between us two was an introduction, but then it was all about like him, like, so he really didn't want to know anything about me. He just wanted to say things about him. And I was like, one, I didn't ask you, and two, I don't know how knowing this information is even pertinent to moving forward in our relationship. So it was just it was a weird dialogue, for lack of.
So he's probably intimidated by you, and he wanted to sell himself. The product was himself, which he's insecure about, so he oversold it.
Very true. Like, very, very true. Yeah, like which is huge. Yeah. Like anything else that you wish people would ask you, or no? Because that went on a really interesting trail there.
Nothing comes to mind.
All right. I was just curious if we can mine down a little bit, but it's all good. All right, Steven, you made it to the end, man. That's the like I said, the last question that I always ask people. Thanks so much for jumping in, sharing your insights, experiences. Man, I just look up to you. I think you lead a very interesting life to me, because I love the way you think, and I love what you do on the side too as well. I think it's just intriguing on multiple levels. But yeah, I'm glad that you punched in. Before we wrap up, anything else that you want to share, or any projects that you're currently working on that you want to mention? $1 million pens.
Yeah. I think I'm trying to understand self-awareness right now, and I'm trying to understand the fullness of maturity. So I'm writing a book, but it's going to be a decade-long research project.
Sure.
So how do I help me become the fullest image of Christ that God designed me to be?
If people want to know about you or get involved with what you have going on, is there a place that you could send them? Like, how they connect with you?
They could just email me. My email's on the Great Lakes District website.
Which, for those of you who are not part of the Evangelical Free Church of America, we'll post that in the information section. Because people are like, "What is that? Where does that come from?" All right, Steven, fantastic. To our listeners, thank you guys for tuning in to another episode, Jordan's Famous Friends. Remember, subscribe, rate, review, send it to somebody. If this has been beneficial to you, pass it along. It is so important that we keep this podcast rolling in regards to letting people have the opportunity to share the content here. There are links to a couple of things that Steven talked about. If you're curious, in the description, go ahead and click those. But stay tuned. There's more inspiring conversations coming up with some more remarkable individuals along the way. Until then, take care. We'll talk to you soon. God bless.